The revised and enlarged edition of the Dead Sea Scriptures, an English translation with introduction and notes by Theodor H. Gaster. Now, we're talking about the Essene community, but the Essene were not so called by themselves. They were called the righteous, the Asim, the Hashimim. But Essene, no, that was a later title for them. And we can say that the Chesedim are a spiritual descendant of them, but this is before Kabbalah and such. The Essene community, yes, they had leaders, but it wasn't the sort of papacy that we would find in the later Christian church, and it wasn't just an alternative hierarchy like unto that at Jerusalem. And they were like unto the Nazis in the respect that they didn't take much notice of the Book of Esther. I mean, they didn't have anything to say about any of the parts of it, as far as we know. Now, before the Christian texts were being written, we have remnants of what can be said to be presaging the Christian text. You have stuff that lines up with parts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the Acts, the Romans, the Corinthians. We actually have more that has to do with John if you ignore the Bacchus and write in Jesus, right? The Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, Hebrews, James, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, John, 2 John, Jude, and Revelations. So before these books were even written, we can say that they pretty much could have all been grafted off of. Now, they did exist in a time, the Essenes did exist in a time where it can be said Jesus lived, but the Apollonius Christ of Paul's generation, no. So all four of the characters didn't live, but you had, the first couple, the teacher of wickedness and the Judah Barabbas ben Judah, Apollonius Christ, Barnabas in the middle there, but you didn't have Apollonius Christ, so you couldn't have all the characters which became Jesus. Now, that it's been established that the Kabbalah didn't really start until after Sufi influence and certain structures of the Quran had been worked in a certain way, and then they came up with their things. You also have, you have some mystical elements and some stuff like that, but you don't have what you could call Kabbalah at this time. But they had more information to some of these passages. And there were different versions that did exist among some of these communities. Some had extra verses, some had verses others. Some it was obviously a commentary, some it was not. So it's very, very strong evidence that the Jews did change their scriptures, and there were different versions of Jews, even among the ones of the desert and the ones of this, and there is more reference to demonology than other non-satanic forms of Judaism, particularly among Belial and the sons of darkness. Belial's given Belial, maybe not. Now the Yud is before the Ayin, but it's the Ayin. It's not an Aleph, it's an Ayin. So none of this Belial. You gotta go ha with it. It's not without masters. It's worthless to the master. you can translate it as that, but not without masters. So it can be kind of a slur towards the devil. And is it the devil or is it the entity of the South? They had an understanding of cosmology that differed in parts because, for example, instead of Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, Ariel, they very commonly used Shuriel, Shuriel as the and different variations of that. You got Sarakael, you have Sarakuyal, you have Zuriho, you have Kaurehal, and you have Sarkiel, Sarakiel. So you had different variations of where we have Ariel, the light of God. But these were people that went beyond ritual. Yes, they adhered to the rituals, but they saw faith as something more than rules, a righteousness that goes beyond rules, a connection to spiritual matters, and an explanation. Like they understood the language to a degree that the entire Talmudic tradition, I don't think, had the level of understanding of the Essene community in what we see from the remnants. Yeah, there are 3 million words in the Jerusalem Talmud or the Babylonian Talmud that's that many words, and the other one's pretty big too. But they understood the language in the way of the time. They understood the issue of messiahs, as there could be more than one at one time, but there's the Messiah, HaMashiach, which is different than just the Messiah. But they didn't understand, the twists that happened in the Christian community in regards to the Tanakh, particularly, this Greek translation that they rendered and they call the Septuagint. That's really the Greek version of the so-called Old Testament. That's, they went beyond those understandings and they seem to understand some things that are lost to us today. So it's important to look at the older. And why didn't they mention Esther? Well, because they probably understood that Esther and Mordecai was really Ashtaroth and Marduk, whatever other variations of names you want to call it. It doesn't mention God at all. It's pretty good, bad advice to teenage girls. Hey, paint yourself up and put on a lot of perfume and go try to get the rich guy because he's going to marry someone, right? Not necessarily. And the Song of Solomon also doesn't mention God, but there's some prophecies and some lessons that can be gained from it that the church I was raised in didn't believe in the authority of the Song of Solomon because they didn't believe it was an inspired writing, very convenient, the one that actually could be used to prophesy, prophet after Jesus. But, we have different sources that went into this. Some of these I own. The Manual of Discipline, the Sadducite Document, the Formula of Blessing, the Hymn of Initiants, the Book of Hymns and Psalms of Thanksgiving, the Oration of Moses, Commentary on Isaiah, Commentary on Hosea, Commentary on Micah, Commentary on Habakkuk, Commentary on Psalm 37, the War of the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness. There's some interesting extra books here that could be from prophet figures that the Bible does not include, or things that are said about figures that we don't, that we have more of, or we have different things of. I have a book on the shelf. What's the name of it? I can't see it. It's Lost Books of the Bible or something like this. It's old enough. I should share it at some point on this channel. I'm trying to get permissions from the Edward Bordeaux Szekely Society to share of his books. I mean, I'm going to comment on things. I'm not just going to recite it all as gospel truth. We got, so the War of the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness, darkness being a epitaph for jinn, perhaps, and Sons of Light being the Malacca, the light beings versus the fire beings. the manual of discipline for the future congregation of Israel, the new covenant, the coming down, thy kingdom come, memoirs of the patriarchs, liturgy of the angels, a prayer of intercession. And so we can divide these into subjects as well. You got the community, the government of the community, the laws and practice, the opponents of the brotherhood, the last things, the end of days, and the angelology. And the demonology, as I said, when you compare to Christianity, really, when you compare it to what you're typically going to find in Judaism, even with all the Dibbakuks and stuff like that, so the Middle Ages, unless you're grafting from a form of Jewish Satanism, there's many forms of Judaism. They're not all monotheist, and they're not all totally on God's side either, or even not on God's side at all. But remember, every prophet would have said, we want a nation of priests and priestesses. So that was what's going on with the things. It's a 400-something page book, so I don't know what to say other than that. But it's not about blood and soil. It's about being ready for there to be a community that holds up an example, and it starts with the individual.